We want those sanctions to be lifted, in fact, yesterday.
Why do you have to put sanctions?
These sanctions be removed.
Those that imposed illegal sanctions must heed this call.
SADC member states to continue to speak with one voice on the issue of Zimbabwe.
It is very important. Unity is very important.
Ngariende sanctioning ngariende. Ngariende sanctioning ngariende. Ngariende sanctioning ngariende. Sataki ndokutumira soko inotioka. Sanction. Ngariende sanction. Usuwa kufa soko inotioka. Sataki ndokutumira soko inotioka.
Zimbabwe has endured economic sanctions for 2 decades that have led to the collapse of the national economy. One might wonder how we got here. Well, the explanation is perfectly simple.
Takazowana sanctions akaunzwa nema Western countries mugore 2000 pamusaka pokuti takange tapa chisungo seZANU kuti aiwa tavakuda ivhu redu ridzokere kuvanhu vabatane nevhu ravo. Amusadaro rambai muchigara kuchera muri papo vhuri nevashomanene ivavo kati kwete. Commonwealth kana muchidero garai muripo kwene Commonwealth yenyu. Isu totora vhu redu tikagovera kuvanhu.
All we know ourselves is that they were very much disturbed by our land reform program, and therefore the issue of human rights came after they've noted that it is our right to own our land.
The sanctions were imposed, as you may know, by the European Union, the United States of America, and the white Commonwealth countries to oppose the land reform program.
Sanctions are a form of warfare, economic warfare. Therefore, the best way to understand sanctions is to regard them as a continuation of our liberation struggle.
Sanctions came as a result of the people of Zimbabwe's claim for their land. Remember, every Zimbabwean is aware that when the white men came and finally landed here in Harare in September 1890, raised the Union Jack, it was about taking land away from our ancestors. And the second Chimrenga and the first Chimrenga just did that, to take that land back, using exactly the same apparatus that was used by the Western. They used their guns, and the people of Zimbabwe were ready to die, and they continued to die. And when they did that, finally, in 1980, we got political power.
Well, I feel very good, feel very victorious.
There was joy and jubilation at independence, but it was also time to focus on the future.
The government is going to give people food, houses, farms.
I'm expecting big changes, such as people in the squatters will be removed to good houses.
After our independence, there was the question of economic emancipation. And our party, the ruling party, ZANU-PF, decided that the most important element to empower our people, the one element which was the strongest driving force for all those who participated in the liberation struggle, was the land question. The ZANU-PF government undertook the land reform program as an effort to democratize the land ownership in our country, to restore the land to its original owners, which had been taken away at gunpoint by the imperialist forces. Having lost the war on the battlefield, our detractors, our colonizers, could not accept the empowerment of our people through the land reform program. They had to resist.
And there's no way or place for me to go. This is my home. And this is where I intend to die.
I feel sick. I am worried because if he should nationalize, as has been said, I stand to lose everything.
No, actually, I'm not too happy about it at all, because, you know, he's been responsible for, you know, his men have been responsible for lots of atrocities, you know, in this country. And also, he is a communist.
Well, I am frightened because I feel we've lost the war. We've been fighting for it, and all the things that everybody has fought for has gone. We've lost it. Quite honestly.
Haven't you got any brains in your head to know what you've done?
How do you feel about Mr. Mugabe's victory?
I think it stinks, and the British stink with it because you've just given a victory to bloody Russia, you idiot.
Well, there you have it. Even after the war, the Rhodesians were not happy.
Well, it's sad, isn't it, that we've got to resort to this kind of thing when there's no need for it. They're building up this land issue into a monstrous affair when there's no need for it, because they've got all the land they want.
They had failed to resist militarily, so they resorted to economic warfare. And this is how sanctions came into being.
They were in two parts. They targeted those individuals they thought spearheaded the land reform. Secondly, they targeted the country, especially companies which were considered to have an economic positive impact on the country.
A former British ruler known as Winston Churchill once said, "Land monopoly is not the only monopoly which exists, but it is by far the greatest of monopolies. It is a perpetual monopoly, and it is the mother of all other forms of monopoly." It is this monopoly on land by the British colonialists that forced the people of Zimbabwe to take up arms and wage an armed struggle.
In actual fact, the question of sanctions emanates from the initiative of the people of Zimbabwe when they finally decided to liberate themselves. And the inception or creation of ZANU-PF as a revolutionary party actually indicated to our erstwhile enemy that the people of Zimbabwe have risen and that they are prepared to take a long walk to freedom. During the liberation struggle, there was a time, you remember the Kissinger issue, when the war had actually escalated faster than they expected, and they mooted a plan to stop that from happening. And it was this period of detente where veterans of the liberation struggle, or war veterans, had very difficult times because the Kissinger plan was about to stop the war. In actual fact, it's sanctions of their nature. It was sanctions that was given to the parties and PF then so that it doesn't prosecute the war. All what is happening today is a continuation of Wondo Chimrenga.
It is very important. Unity is very important. Unity is very important. Unity is very important.
At the Lancaster House Conference, the issue of land reform was hotly debated. However, the Lancaster House Constitution contained a clause in Section 16 that ensured that land reform will be based on the willing buyer, willing seller principle. This section could not be amended for a period of 10 years. The Lancaster House Constitution paid little attention to the plight of the black majority, leaving their wounds to fester, then burst after 20 years. Land grievances and claims were therefore unresolved, left instead to the operation of market forces through the willing buyer, willing seller principle.
The 1980 independence and the 1980 Lancaster House Agreement, not as an agreement, it was an arrangement that would give them time to revive and strengthen their position in this country.
For 20 years, the colonial white farmers, who formed 2% of the population, continued to own 70% of the land. In 1997, the Labour Party chief whip, Claire Short, wrote to the then Minister of Agriculture, Comrade Kumbirai Kangai, and said, "I should make it clear that we do not accept that Britain has a special responsibility to meet the cost of land purchase in Zimbabwe. We are a new government from diverse backgrounds without links to former colonial interests." This infamous letter was read at the ZANU-PF Second Annual People's Conference in Mutare. Then after, the late former President Mugabe met the then British Prime Minister Tony Blair at the sidelines of Chogam to try and bring the British back to their senses. But Mr. Blair was non-committal.
In 1979, when we had our Lancaster conference, the British and Americans assured us that they would provide funding which we would use in the process of land reform on a basis of willing seller, willing buyer. But when Prime Minister Tony Blair came in, he abrogated that relationship. But we said, whether there's British money or there's no British money, we'll proceed to correct the imbalance.
Incidentally, the then Chief Justice Anthony Gabe said, "The court would not tolerate any misappropriation of white-owned land outside due process." This was, of course, against judiciary rules. That was it. The ordinary indigenous Zimbabwean was fed up. In 1998, over 4,000 people from the Soswe community, led by the now late Chief Soswe, Enoch Zenda, moved into several surrounding commercial farms in Marondera East. This triggered what was to be known as the fast-track land reform program that sought to correct the land imbalances created by colonialism. The land reform program was heavily opposed by the Western neo-colonialists who vowed to punish the ZANU-PF government for allowing its people to take back their land.
The West is not forgiven Zimbabwe for compulsorily acquiring its land from the white settlers. It has not forgiven Zimbabwe. It will never will.
Zimbabwe's issue is and was always about the land. Zimbabwe's issue was always about protecting its sovereignty and independence. And Zimbabwe's issue was always about refusing to be the puppet of white people. So that is the basis and the reason why these sanctions were imposed.
The Western countries retaliated. On 18 February 2002, the European Union Foreign Affairs Ministers imposed what they called smart sanctions against Zimbabwe. A year later, in 2003, the United States of America followed suit and imposed what they called targeted sanctions at 141 individuals and enterprises. But here is the catch. With the so-called targeted sanctions, when you strategically target the CEO of a country and the entire leadership, as well as the key national economic entities, you effectively cripple the economy of the entire nation. On 13 June 2000, the late Morgan Tsvangirai, the then leader of the Movement for Democratic Change, MDC, attended the American House of Representatives Subcommittee on Africa, where he said, "Let me also emphasize the fact that the MDC is committed to a transparent, equitable, and reasonable sound land distribution policy. The current process of farm innovation is totally unacceptable to us." Basically, the MDC were against the land reform program. In response, Mr. Chester Crocker said, "Zimbabwe is a place which has many things going for it in terms of its resources, human and physical, in terms of the strength of its industrial economy, its commercial agriculture, making Zimbabwe a significant commodity and food exporter, and a key economic partner for all countries of Southern Africa." Clearly, the American government had far-reaching interest in the resources of Zimbabwe. Mr. Crocker continues to say, "This could be an implosion with broad regional implications far beyond those of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe affects an entire region. It is at the hub of an entire region in many ways, both political and economic." So I think we have a lot at stake. This is about our principles and our interest in Zimbabwe.
Another reason for the sanctions, basically to make the economy scream, is that they want South Africa, Namibia, which have the same history as ourselves in terms of land being in the hands of one ethnic group. They want those countries not to go the route of Zimbabwe, not to embark on any meaningful land reform.
The imperialist powers are very, very worried. And they've always been very, very worried that the bold and unprecedented moves taken by ZANU PF in the repossession and the redistribution land, which has never been done in the history of decolonization, would influence other countries in the region. That they would lose what they now control economically in the region.
So it's intimidatory to South Africa, it's intimidatory to Namibia, that they should never embark on land reform.
In Mozambique, in South Africa, and elsewhere, they have not done it the Zimbabwean style. That we simply walked to the land and got our land and gave it to our people. And our people today are enjoying the fruits of their land. Like what happened to the children of Israel, if you ever read about them in the Bible. They are now in Canaan, they can grow whatever they want to grow.
It is very important. Unity is very important. Unity is very important. Unity is very important.
On 21 December 2001, America enacted a law they called Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act, or ZIDERA in short. The first thing to note is that these sanctions are illegal.
Say that it's my illegal sanctions, but those things were about my illegal sanctions. They put nyika dzese dzakaramba kusapota Britain America pavakaenda kunoti nyika yatora minda nechisimba. Saka my illegal sanctions aya wakuamerica vanhu waramba washaya support, voting yaitwa ndo pakaexerciswa veto power neChina neRussia. Ndo muchiona Zimbabwe ichiramba yakabatana neChina neRussia. For the first time vakashandisa simba iroro zvavasati vamboshandisa anywhere else but kusupporta Zimbabwe.
In its policy statement, ZIDERA is said to support the people of Zimbabwe in their struggle to effect peaceful, democratic change. One may ask, democratic change from what to what?
The sanctions were put in place to support me. They were put in place to support Mr. Morgan Tsvangirai, our Prime Minister.
Former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Mr. Chester Crocker, had this to say: the option is to work through all appropriate channels for a change in power in Zimbabwe. So if we were to decide to try and work for a change in power in Zimbabwe, I would hope that we would have the wisdom to be discreet, to be low-key and avoid giving those in power the excuse that foreigners are out there to get them. We would treat Zimbabwe basically like a pariah under this option. We would disengage from official government to government relationships, programming of any sort, and wait for pressure to mount, helping them as long as best we can. Really.
This acquisition and the redistribution of land triggered a vengeful strategy by the United Kingdom, who mobilized their allies in Europe and the United States to punish Zimbabweans for having repossessed what has always been theirs.
The sanctions which were imposed primarily by the European Union and the United States, basically to kill the economy, to make the economy scream so that the people of Zimbabwe can revolt against their government. That was the intention, that the people of Zimbabwe will find the economic situation so bad and blame it on the government and revolt against it so that they reverse the land reform program.
They are meant to cause people of Zimbabwe to rise against their own government. So it is a political strategy. Sanctions are a political strategy from the West.
Now Zimbabwe. Let's look back to the period of the government of national unity. Those Zimbabweans who were calling for sanctions wanted them removed just because they were now in power.
Mr. Tsvangirai is now saying the sanctions must go. I am saying the sanctions must go. So what is the value of the sanctions when the beneficiaries of the sanctions are saying they don't need?
So this is a regime change gimmick. A case of if I'm not in power, then everyone else must suffer. As they say, kudira jecha.
We are a legitimate government, elected by the people. And therefore, all the noise being made by whosoever must come to an end. We can't be in an election mode every time. We must concentrate on the economy.
We will always have sellouts, even during the liberation struggle. Even now, in our struggle for economic liberation, sellouts are still there, who collaborate with our detractors.
MTC and the other parties have been working with our detractors to have sanctions continued against us. In any case, they are the ones who call for those sanctions. They are the ones who convinced the Western countries and the EU to impose sanctions against us.
The United States Congress must continue to do what it has done very well in the past. I think everyone must know that there's a reward for good behavior. There's a reward for constitutionalism. There's a reward for international engagement.
This was for a clear purpose.
of neo-colonial interests, which these organizations are.
But we can't do this alone. It shall need the support of the international community, including the United States and Congress in particular at this critical stage. We know that this struggle has been long and difficult, but we're confident that we'll complete what we in the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance started in 1999 when we formed the MDC.
So I, for one, am reluctant to see us take any steps to lighten or relieve sanctions or other international restrictions on loans or partnership until we see, as you suggested in your testimony, concrete steps by the administration of Emerson Mnangagwa and any successors.
So these ZIDERA sanctions are about regime change.
It is very, very unfortunate and very, very sad that Zimbabweans, some political parties in this country are being used as agents of imperialism to facilitate the expropriation of our resources. Many people do not know that Act of Congress in the United States, which goes under the name of ZIDERA, was drafted by Zimbabweans, Zimbabwean lawyers, who are leaders of political parties, opposition parties in this country, drafted that law to impose sanctions on their own country. The Americans just took it, it has been drafted by our own Zimbabweans. I think Zimbabwe is the only country in the world where you have an opposition party whose only policy is to destroy their own country, under the mistaken belief that that might help them come to power.
It's treasonous, and whenever I've encountered MDC Alliance leaders, it be Chamisa, it be Biti, whenever I've encountered them in the street, I tell them right in their face, they are very unpatriotic. What they've been doing to this country is treasonous. You don't get that in the United States. You don't get that in any other country except Zimbabwe, where Zimbabweans go out to campaign to hate their own country, to campaign for not only just imposition, for expansion of sanctions against their own people, and still wanted to be elected. That is unpatriotic. We want in this country political parties which put first Zimbabwe's interests. In the same way that Trump is saying, he puts first American interests above any other interests. Now we have in Zimbabwe political parties and persons going out to put foreign interests above Zimbabwe's interests. That is treasonous.
The economic assault on the Zimbabwean economy by the Americans has remained relentless. 5 years later, Mr. Croker was quoted saying to the American Senate, "To separate the Zimbabwean people from ZANU PF, we are going to have to make their economy scream. And I hope you senators have the stomach for what you have to do." And scream. Indeed, the economy did.
Asimafuni